A little bit of a disclaimer. My main job is not, as Jim said, the top person involved with the stem cell program. My main job is to stay out of as much trouble as possible in this politically and ethically sensitive and dynamic area. So I do think that the Governor Patterson, who actually spearheaded this entire effort and to whom we are indebted for having actually made the $600 million commitment, might take issue with me being a top person. The commissioner who chairs both committees and the board might take issue with that. Larry Sturman, who is our executive director of the NISTEM program, director of the Wadsworth Center, and was recently referred to as our Captain Sullenberger of the NISTEM program because of his knowledge and skill in leading us forward, might take issue with that. Along with a half dozen colleagues here who could have filled in and provided this presentation. So I'm very happy to be in the position that I am in here and presenting this information. I'm going to be as challenged as my colleagues here in keeping to a 15-minute time frame here. I'm going to provide the briefest of overviews, just a little bit of the structure of the Stem Cell Board. It was created just 2 years ago in 2007 as part of the budget. $600 million commitment over 11 years, $100 million in the first year and $50 million each year thereafter. There's 13 members on each of the funding committee and the ethics committee, and that's actually how our board is comprised. It's, you're not appointed to the board, but you are appointed to each one of the committees. And the 13 members includes the commissioner on each and also Dr. Hone, who serves on each of the committees, so that there is some overlap between the committees and some collaboration there. I could talk for hours on this particular program. There's going to be a lot that I'm not going to cover, so I want to encourage you to take a look at our website. We webcast our meetings. We have information about all the grants that we've awarded. The RFAs go up on it. You can sign up for e-alerts. The minutes of the meetings, the bio sketches of all of our board members, our strategic plan, our annual reports, and other links are on there. So for what I don't cover, I'd be glad to answer questions later on, but I also encourage you to go to our website later on. It's interesting, as people have been up here, they've been talking a lot about the ethical issues and the IP and tech transfer issues, but there's really a lot more from our standpoint, from a policy standpoint, of what the Empire State Stem Cell Board has to make policy decisions about. It's $600 million. What kind of research are you going to fund? So one of the first initiatives of the Stem Cell Board, after getting approving initial institutional development grants, was to essentially make decisions about how are we going to spend this money and develop this strategic plan. The first meeting was on October 22nd, 2007, and by June 27th, 2008, we had adopted a strategic plan. Copies of it are out in the foyer. And I also encourage you to pick that up because it really tells you a lot about, when you talk about the outlook for stem cell research in New York State. This is the document that I think tells you the most about it. This is our mission statement. It's about funding the best science, to move the science forward, to seek cures, improve therapies, and it's really also about building that community of stem cell research scientists and supporting them in a way to make the science grow in New York State. While this was not an economic development initiative per se, it really was about funding the science. We really have a significant recognition of the fact that it also has the ability to expand our economy here in New York State. I really think it's a new frontier in our economy that we need to be paying attention to. The strategic planning, while it is an 11-year funding effort, it really focused only on the first 5 years, recognizing that this is a rapidly evolving field, and the bulk of the money is going to be devoted to research. We also need to encourage new young scientists to come into the field, and also established scientists to consider moving into stem cell research. So there is money in there for training, infrastructure. You need the facilities with the changes in the federal regulations, and there was some debate over whether or not you really needed to have separate facilities. You still need facilities that are going to support stem cell researchers, and some of the equipment and needs are unique. LC refers to ethical, legal, social implications, and education. And we have allocated specific funding for efforts in that area, and then we are attempting to keep our administrative costs to a minimum in the 3 to 5% area. Just touching briefly on some of the research goals, we are about funding basic stem cell biology research, and as people have talked about, a lot of policies really talks about human embryonic stem cell research. The vast majority of research that we are funding is not human embryonic stem cell research. It is a lot of animal models and plant models, and models using adult stem cells as well. We do have a desire that the strategic plan expressed an interest in the translational area, as well as looking at disease-based as well as the basic stem cell biology, looking at developing new stem cell-based therapies and bioassays for drug development, which is one of the areas that scientists think that there's a lot of promise for, and that's a whole other topic. And they have identified the derivation, use, and evaluation of new and existing stem cell lines as priorities. Training, I talked a little bit about this. One of the areas that we're moving forward with is helping new, young, promising scientists move from fellow to faculty and develop their careers. That's in addition to encouraging fellowships and other training opportunities. And also there was a recognition that we really need to encourage a lot more conversation throughout our researchers in New York State. We discovered in an early survey of New York State researchers that a lot of them did not know what else was going on in New York State. So there's a desire to include communication and collaborative efforts. The infrastructure also focuses on having multi-institutional facilities, shared facilities, so the scientists, again, have some conversations. There's a little bit more synergy created in our programs. ELSI, the Ethics Committee is primarily responsible for advising the funding committee on the ethical, scientific, and medical issues and standards that should be developed for the NISTEM funded research. They have been doing this on an ongoing effort. They have met at least 14 times, or I think they're headed into their 14th meeting. Tomorrow, actually, is their very next meeting. And you can watch it on webcast, or you can attend the meeting yourself. And there's a desire also to focus on educating the public, researchers, and diverse communities on stem cell research and related ethical issues. Because there is a lot of confusion about what this means, and it is a topic of conversation that there needs to be a lot of discussion on. And we do want to build support for what we are doing. An administrative goal that we have really is supporting the mission of the board. The board really does provide guidance on all of the things that we are doing, and we keep them fully informed of what we are doing. And we're interested in acting in a manner that always engenders the public trust. One of the aspects that was included in the legislation was that all stem cell proposals, all research proposals will go through a peer review by colleagues, experienced colleagues in stem cell research and basic research to make sure that we are first and foremost funding the best possible science. And that's another issue that we can't emphasize enough. We also, our contracts also contain our standards and include a requirement that the information, when we're spending taxpayer dollars, we want the information, the results of the research to be shared with the public so that we're maximizing the benefits to New York State residents. We're also in the process of evaluating IP, tech transfers, and fiscal policies to determine how to maximize the benefits to New York State. We currently have a work group that is created that it consists of board members, of ethics committee members, and funding committee members, and outside experts, and we're bringing in people from the pharma community and academic institutions to talk about what should our policies look like so that we are furthering the science and helping to bring it from bench to bedside. And that really addresses the next point there. Thus far, we do have a peer review organization. This is, again, we've really only been in existence for 18 months, while the statute created us about 2 years ago. 10 RFAs have been issued. We've approved awards for institutional development, consortium planning, shared equipment and facilities, investigator-initiated research, and research targeted to the development and evaluation of new pluripotent stem cell lines. We're also looking at curricular development and internships that recently, those RFAs were recently issued, and additional ones have been approved by the funding committee but are not yet issued for additional research and shared facilities, fellowship faculty, and RFAs targeted to the development of new human embryonic stem cell lines. Policies. And now where I get to sort of dovetail on what other people have been talking about here. The Ethics Committee has looked very heavily at the NAS and ISSCR guidelines on the ethical conduct of research as a stepping off point. Part of that is because we do not want to have different standards in existence that vary from all the other researchers out there, because when you develop a stem cell line, you want the stem cell line then to be able to be used by other researchers, not just in New York State. So that's one of the reasons why we've looked at that. escrow committees. Escrow stands for embryonic stem cell review organizations. Stem cell research organization. Review organization? Research. Thank you. This actually was a concept that was developed by NAS, followed to some extent by ISSCR, where you have bodies that will actually do a review of the ethical issues for any proposed derivation of new stem cell lines or the use of existing lines. And in New York State, we took those standards and added in some additional IRB-like enhancements that exist in the federal regulations, such as composition and record-keeping kinds of issues, which we were surprised did not exist in the prior NAS guidelines. Informed consent, we've mostly adopted the standards that are like NAS and ISSCR, with leaning a little bit more towards ISSCR, with some unique modifications. But those modifications will be applied to researchers developing stem cell lines here. We also, so we allow the use of lines developed elsewhere in research funded by the NASDEM program that comply with NAS or ISSCR, because we're not going to expect that every researcher across the world, across the United States, is going to be familiar with some of the unique requirements, but we recognize that there is a good foundation for the ethical derivation of stem cell lines in these other guidelines. By the way, I do want to mention that Robert Swither is here. He's a member of our ethics committee. He is a terrific addition to our ethics committee, and he's one of the people who specifically called to our attention the lack of IRB-like standards for the escrow committees. Fan club here. Economic development, IP and tech issues. Currently, we have requirements in our contracts with our researchers that are like by Dole with regard to who's going to control and have the rights to patent any developments, but there are specific information sharing requirements, as I mentioned earlier. There is an RFP that has been issued for us to do an assessment of economic development. We want to understand what kind of impact we are having on economic development in the state, and potentially look at ways in which we can, while honoring funding the best science, also help economic development in the state and basically leverage our funds for additional funding to be made available for more stem cell research and translational work. Currently there is a board work group, as I mentioned, that is looking at IP and economic development issues. We have looked, the board has looked at the California standards for IP, the restrictions that are imposed, and its complex formulas, record keeping, etc. And basically, they've concluded that that is not the direction that they want to go. California was a little bit boxed in by their proposition, the language in their proposition, that they needed to come up with something that made sure that there was a return on the investment to California in order to essentially encourage people to vote for that particular proposition. Impact of pending NIH policies. By the way, I do want to mention that also a few things I did not put up there. We are, our ethics committee is going to be looking at chimeras starting with the June meeting, and that's going to be a heavy topic. There's been a lot of discussions about the issue of what do we mean by respect for the embryo. Is the embryo deserving of respect? And they have been discussing also the payment of gamete donors, but has not yet reached any formal conclusion on that. The dialogues are always interesting, and I encourage you to read our minutes on our website for those committees. So, pending impact. The funding committee at its last meeting looked at this and expressed concern about the fact that the limitations on only using lines derived from leftover embryos. Also the retroactive application of their requirements. There are some aspects of their requirements in NIH that do not match verbatim the NES or ISSCR requirements. One of the things that's kind of interesting is the fact that, I have 2 minutes, is the fact that NIH wants the consent of the people who sought reproductive services. NAS and ISSCR, they talk about the gamete donors, which would be read to be the egg donors and the sperm donors. And there's a reconsent when you transfer it at the time that it's going to be, the embryo is going to be used for research purposes. The question is, if somebody only got the consents of the gamete donors previously, are those lines now going to be able to be used? There's questions regarding separation of consent. You need to separate the consent to donation for IVF purposes from the subsequent donation for research purposes. That could be something that could be problematic depending upon how that's interpreted, and we've noted that there's a lot of ambiguities on some of the provisions that are in there. It has been noted that even some of the Bush lines, that there's these provisions apply retroactively. We expect some lines that are in existence out there, including some of the Bush lines. We refer to them as the Bush line, the 21 approved stem cell lines for NIH research lines. So many of our researchers in the United States have been using lines, been sort of forced to use lines in NIH research that now they may not be able to use in continuing NIH-funded research. Additional questions and considerations. The NIH guidelines, standards proposed do not require escrow review. Essentially, there is an IRB expectation of review. So, questions about whether or not escrow review is still needed, duplicative, appropriate. There is a certain level of expertise that goes into that a lot of people think will not exist in IRBs. There will also be a question as to whether or not the escrow review satisfies the NIH IRB requirement for review in past and in the future. Will other states fold their requirements into the NIH requirements in some way or maintain NAS-like standards? And again, that goes to the issue of escrow review in particular is in the statute in Connecticut, it's in the California regulations that they have adopted, and many other states, and researchers, whether or not you're in a state where there's funding or not, have been following those kinds of standards. And so then there's an issue then, the impact on collaborations. I think that once the Obama administration adopts whatever final criteria they develop, we as a board will probably need to go back and take a look at where we stand and answer some of these questions with some guidance from NIH. And I think I need it.
Questions. If you'll raise your hand, Michelle Charbonneau has the mic, and she will bring it to you. Just please state your name and identify